Hello class, good afternoon or morning or good evening. I'm not sure what time you're watching this, but here we go. I want to finish up this for response question. SkyView is the name of the class. So this is a sample for response question on the previous video, or on the part A of this SkyView video. We went over how to make the constructor, and that was successful here. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this. Maybe later on I can, in a separate video, include some of the rationality that went into using these if statements and while loops within. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So please make sure that you ask. Part B here, just kind of recapping what we were discussing here. We're recapping what we discussed in the previous video. You make a two-dimensional array. The name of the array is view, and it has elements. In this example, there is 4 horizontal rows and then 3 vertical columns. And I'm just going to see if these values match the previous values: 0.3, 0.7, 0.8, 1.1, 1.4, 0.4, 0.2, 0.5, 0.0, and 0.9, 0.6, 1.6. Okay, so we have this two-dimensional array. In part B, we're supposed to get the average, and so we're supposed to code the method getAverage. It returns the average of a few of these elements. Now, getAverage, if you notice right here, requires 4 arguments: 1, 2, 0, 1. The 4 arguments are basically the start of the row. That's the first argument. So on what row do you want to start? In this case, 1, so that would be this row. The end row, so what row do you want to end? In this case, row 2, so that's the second argument, 2. So I know that I'm going to look at elements in the first row and the second row. And then the third argument, in this case 0, is the start column. So in what column do I want to start? And then finally, the fourth argument is a 1. That's the end call, or the last column, in this case 1, and so 0, 1. And so basically we are looking at the elements that are enclosed in row 1 and row 2, column 0 and column 1, which are basically boxed in right here. We would add 1.4 plus 1, 1.1 plus 1.4 plus 0.2 plus 0.5. So we added those 4 quantities. There's 4 values. That means that we end up dividing by 4. And in the example here, the average is 0.8. So that's the case we're going to test. We're expecting an answer of 0.8. We're going to take a quick look then here at our class, getAverage. Here I have start row, end row, start call, end call. These are parameters. Their name here is a parameter. You have to precede the parameter, the variable, within a data type, an integer in this case. Okay, this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of, again, I haven't worked this out, so if I don't get this right the first time, well, that means that I need to troubleshoot. I need to figure out what went wrong and fix anything that is not working the way it should, which is, again, how it works. Rarely do you get something right on the first go. That's the whole purpose of working through these examples, so we practice and practice and practice. I'm thinking of using a for loop to traverse the rows. So like maybe start row and to end row. And so I'm considering doing something like this. I can also use a while loop. I'm going to start with the for loop. Let's try to see if we can work this out. Int, let's say that the row, we want to start at the value start row. Like that. We want to go until row is less than or equal to end row, because it's inclusive. And so if I recall correctly, the start row would be 1, the end row would be 2, and so I want row to be a 1, and then I also want it to be 2, and so less than or equal to 2, and I increment row by 1. And when we are accessing elements, in this case, we're only accessing the elements. We're not changing the elements of the two-dimensional array. When we access elements of a two-dimensional array, a good implementation would be to use a nested for loop. That means that you have a for loop, and then inside of this for loop you have another for loop. Now the reason being is that we think of one of the outer for loop is used to traverse the rows, and I'll write a comment here. So we're traversing the rows, while the inner for loop will be used to traverse the columns. And so I'll do the same thing. Call equals, let's start it at start call. We want to go into call is less than or equal to end call, and we want to increment column by 1. And now this is traversing the columns. And then I put my curly braces. Now I know what I want to do. I want to add up the values at those locations. So I'm going to make a variable called sum, and sum is what it used to equal. Now I'm going to write it the lengthier way. Sum is what it used to be plus whatever the value is at the location row call. As such. Okay, the short way of writing sum equals sum plus is to do sum plus equals. So it's just a shorthand way of writing this. Now because I've initialized sum, I'm using a variable called sum, I need to initialize it. It's going to be a double. The average is going to be a decimal value. I'm going to initialize it to 0. It's the best value that I can initialize it to. And so I'm going to be adding the values, the elements at location row call, where row and column are changing as you loop through this code. And so just to kind of give you an idea, the first value of row would be 1. And so this would be a 1. And then the first value of call would be 0. And so this would be 1, 0. And if you look here, row 1, column 0 is 1.1. So I'm adding that to sum. And then I would go, okay, well, now call, I'm going to increase call by 1. So now call is 1. And 1 is still less than or equal to end call. And if you recall, end call is 1 right here, the fourth argument. So now I'm going to add view of 1, 1 to the previous value. And then you complete the inner for loop. You use seed control to the outer for loop, and you're going to increment row by 1. So that now we're on row 1, 2, I believe, 2. And then we're going to do call 0 and call 1 again. And so we're adding these 4 elements. So that's actually a pretty straightforward implementation. One thing that I need to do here is to figure out how many elements I ended up adding. And so I'm going to make a variable called count. I'll make it a double. Actually, I'll make it an integer because at the end I'll divide sum by count. And when you divide a double by an integer, your answer is a double. So I'm going to start count at 0. And every time that I add the element at location row call to sum, I'm going to increase count by 1 because that basically I've added an element. And so count at the end is going to be 4 because we're going to end up actually looping 4 times. We're going to do the inner loop twice. Let me kind of show you graphically what that would look like. So I'm going to perform line 47 twice, 1.1, 1.4, and then I loop back to the row, in this case row 2, and I do once again line 47 twice again, but now I add 0.2, 0.5, and effectively count is going to end up with a value of 4, because every time that I execute line 47, which is going to be a total of 4 times, I'm also going to execute line 48, which will also be a total of 4 times. And so the average then would be simply sum, return sum, divided by count. There's no need to store this in a separate variable. You could if you wanted to. You could do up here something like double average equals sum divided by count, and then return average. You can do this. There's nothing wrong with this. However, we make variables if we expect to use them somewhere else, and I'm not going to use average anywhere other than to just return the value. And so at least for me, it's just better to do it this way, where I don't make a new variable, and I just there was a better way to have done that than undo all that. But I'm just going to return whatever sum divided by count is. I need to test this. So get average does return a value. I'm going to compile it to verify that this is working just fine. Okay, good. I'm going to go to my tester class. And here I printed the two-dimensional array from part A, which is in a separate video. After I do that, I want to then, summer night is the object. It is a SkyView object. So from my summer night object, I want to execute the get average. I need to send it 4 arguments. I'm going to use the exact same ones that are here in the example. 1, 2, 0, and 1. 1, 2, 0, and 1. The 1, the 2, the 0, and the 1 are the values. We call them arguments here. We call them parameters here that are going to be stored in these parameters. Start row is going to be 1, and row is going to be 2. Start call is going to be 0, and call is going to be 1. So I need to send those. Now, if I compile this, it works fine, but if I run it, I won't see anything. So there's no number here. The reason is that get average returns to me the average. It returns to me whatever sum was divided by count, but here on line 19, I do nothing with it. So I'm going to create a variable double called average. So right here is a good example of where I would actually make a new variable. I'm going to say average is equal to whatever get average returns to me when I send a 1, a 2, a 0, and a 1. I'm expecting this to be 0.8. I'm going to copy this print statement. Try to save yourself some typing whenever possible. I'm going to paste. I'm going to put here some text. The average is, I put that so that it's a little easier to identify when I print, and then I'm going to print the value of average. I'm going to compile. I'm expecting 0.8. If I don't get 0.8, this video is going to be longer than expected. There it is, 0.8. We can test one more if you want, just to verify that our implementation is good. So let's consider adding the first row, second row, and then first column, second column. So this right here, not the 1.1, just 0.7, 0.8, 1.4, 0.2. So that would be row 0 to row 1. So that would be where we start, row 0 to row 1, and then column 0 is this one. So column 1, column 2. So 1, 2. Now, let me do that first to see what I would expect. I would expect 0.7, well, not 0.7 plus 0.8. What am I doing here? Okay, well, clearly I don't know how to type on a calculator here. 0.7 plus 0.8 plus 1.4 plus 0.4. If you did this in your head already, good for you. And we're going to divide by 4. 0.825. That's the answer I'm expecting. I'm going to run. I made a change to this class. Notice a little asterisk right there. SkyViewer. I can't zoom in, but there's an asterisk right there. That means I made a change, so I need to recompile. So I'll do Control V to compile, and the asterisk is gone now. I'm going to run, and 0.825. So this is working perfectly. Good. That would be it. Your answer to SkyView, the SkyView for response question that has to do with two-dimensional arrays and manipulating two-dimensional arrays, would look like something like this. If you have any questions, please send me your questions through the Google Classroom, and I'll do my best to answer them as quickly as I can.